Let me get started here. Can you see my screen? Oh, good, got it. Well, good morning. I just want to express my appreciation for the invitation. You all are having conversations that need to be had all over the country, everywhere. One of the questions that many folks are asking now is, what does the death, the murder of George Floyd mean? What does it mean? Because for the Floyd family, it means the tragic loss of a precious loved one. For the community, it means another one of us in the Black community, sacrificed and murdered, as we have seen so many others, which is what has prompted the call of Black Lives Matter. Our lives matter too, and every time something like Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, it makes us really say that we've got to insist upon our humanity being recognized. But what does it really mean? Does it mean, for example, that we're going to have a policy change, that things are going to be different, that we're going to do some things that are different? And so today I want to talk to you about the death of George Floyd and breaking the cycle of inaction. And I'd like you to focus your attention on this word, inaction. It matters, and you'll see why in a minute. But I do want to start by just a few quotes. One, I'm going to pull out Herman Melville. Y'all went to high school, you might have read Moby Dick. That's the author, the same guy. And here's one of the things he said, and I have this quote that I read it almost every day. I put it up on my wall, which is, the truth, uncompromisingly told, will always have its jagged edges. It is to be expected that anytime people brought to America for their labor, made to labor for free for 250 some years, suffered under Jim Crow for another 100, and have been under social and economic disparities ever since then, are going to tell a story and offer a truth that people on the other side of the power equation may not like, because it will change their lives. It will change everything. But the truth, uncompromisingly told, will have its jagged edges. You will not be able to smoothly and nicely talk about the harm and of oppression, and how changing it is it will be better for everybody in America: white, Black, Native American, Latino, straight, gay, old, young, rural, urban. It will be, but the journey from here to there is going to be with its jagged edges. So let's just accept that fact. Let me also say that I believe firmly, and I want to say, when law ends, tyranny begins. And what I mean by this is that so many of us in America, because of the history and the power dynamics, we occupy the same space, but we don't live in the same world. I'll tell you a quick story. When I was a law student, and I'm 58 now, so I was a law student long time ago, over 30 years ago, I was leading anti-police brutality marches then. I didn't have no law degree, and I was out there. I saw Tonda Sizwe on there, and her dad and I, Chris Nissen, were out there protesting together, and she was not born or just a baby, as my kids, who are now adults, were the same. And one thing occurred to me, that, basically African Americans and people of color, low income people, white, Black, whatever color, so many folks, we didn't really live under the rule of law. It was the rule of whoever happened to be in power at the moment, who had a badge. But it wasn't law. We weren't living under equal protection of the law. People were living under what can only fairly be described as a tyrannical, arbitrary, violent situation. And it's not law. It's the antithesis of law. And where law ends, tyranny begins. If you have a society where not everybody lives under equal protection of the law, the people who don't live under that tyrannical situation. What is tyranny? Arbitrary state violence is tyranny. There's no other way to put it. Well, you could put it any way you want, but everybody the world over knows tyranny when they see it. Is there anybody on this call who did not see the man who stood singly and by himself in front of all those tanks at Tiananmen Square? Jamila, did you see that? That iconic picture, the one man standing in front of, now you probably don't speak Mandarin Chinese. Maybe you do, but probably you don't. Most people over here don't. And yet there was something about that picture that told you, wow, that man by himself standing up against that tyranny, that's something else. I don't live in China. I don't speak Chinese, but I see that picture and that strikes me as something critical. That is what I'm talking about. That man lived under tyranny. But when you see that picture of Derek Chauvin's knee on top of George Floyd, do you need to speak English to know that's bad? No. You don't need to know anything. All you need to do is see it, and you see state power terrorizing somebody and enforcing a system of tyranny on somebody. So what we're really asking for is an extension of law, an extension of constitutional norms, extension of civil and human rights. That's what we're talking about here. And then let me go to a quote by John F. Kennedy, who very astutely said, "Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable." I'm not saying something that I want. I absolutely oppose and do not want violent revolution. But what I'm saying is, where the courts don't work and the legislature don't work and the city council don't work and an unfair, unjust situation prevails, what do you expect to happen? We know what the president of the United States told you what was going to happen, John F. Kennedy. The fact is, we've got to have avenues for peaceful change, or people are just go off, and that's not what anyone really wants. And I don't know any sane person who thinks that's a good thing. And that's why we need to have lawful measures for change. This conversation we're having today is protected by the First Amendment, freedom of expression. That's a good thing. And I would submit to you that we need to use that right to extend some other rights, which is to have a lawful, humane system of security and policing that will ensure everybody's health, safety, and welfare. Now let's talk about what we got. We can talk about what we want, but we need to talk about what we got, because everything is always going to be compared to something else. Is the future better? Well, the future's unknown and uncertain, but people know what they got. Let's talk about what that is just for a minute. We live in a moment and in a time when it is commonplace and extremely expensive to allow police misconduct to prevail. Now, I haven't talked about loss of life, we'll get to that, but let's just talk about loss of money, because some folks in our society only seem to understand and respond to money. New York City alone had paid out vast sums of money because of police misconduct. The bottom line is, we're talking about, literally millions of dollars. Chicago, same thing, north of 80 million bucks. And in Minneapolis, $70 million recently, but we all know Justine Rushtek, white woman killed by a police officer, 20 million, and George Floyd, 27 million. Now, I just want to say, did you ever drive down the street and run over a pothole? Did you ever drive down the street and have the fixtures above you not working? Did you ever see, there's not enough people doing city inspections? Did you ever see, they're not going into swing sets so you can push your 3-year-old nephew or child? We're paying out because police officers didn't do their constitutional duty and treat people with respect. This is a waste of money. And if we were to actually stop police misconduct, we could save ourselves money and put it into things we actually do need. But why stop at that? Civil unrest. That costs a lot of money. I'm talking about two separate things. One is after a system of law says you violated this person's rights, you have to pay a damages, city of Minneapolis, so pay. Well, this is going back to what Kennedy said. If you don't allow peaceful change to happen, people will take matters into their own hands in a very unfortunate way. Well, what's the cost of civil unrest? $500+ million in damages to the Twin Cities. 500 buildings burned down on Lake Street. Across 20 states, could cost insurance companies as much as $1 billion to $2 billion, possibly making this last year's civil unrest the most expensive in American history. But that's just a snapshot. Let's move on. If you look at it, if you look at it, the costliest civil disorders in American history, have cost $1 to $2 billion. We just mentioned that. But LA in 2020 dollars, $1.4 billion. LA in 1965, the Watts, so-called Watts riot, $357 million. Detroit, $322 million. I was there and saw soldiers moving through the streets. True, I was only about 4 years old, but I saw them, and I've never forgotten it. Miami, that was, some of y'all heard Trump say when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Like most things, he copied that from the police chief in Miami back when those disturbances occurred. $204 million of loss of and damage. Washington, D.C., New York, Newark, Baltimore, Chicago, all because systemic oppression, which resulted in social convulsion, right? So that's expensive. A noted and a wonderful author who I would recommend all of y'all reading, a brilliant young woman by the name of Elizabeth Hinton. She has a book out now called America on Fire. She says between 1965 and 2001, there were nearly 2,000 urban rebellions in the United States that were sparked by racially biased policing. And you can bet all of them had overtime costs for the officers who went out there to cover the cost of that event. All of them probably had broken glass, broken light fixtures. Maybe some of them had burnt buildings. This is expensive. What if we just solve the problem? What if we just solve the problem? And of course, loss of life. No question. According to statistics that are reported, and everybody knows things do happen that don't get recorded, and we'll get to that in a moment. About 1,000 people a year get killed by the police annually. About 6,600 since 2015. In 2020, only 18 days in the calendar year when someone was not killed by a state-sponsored agent, or also known as police officer. From 2013 to 2020, police officers were not charged with a crime in 98.3% of officer-involved deaths, which means that this may be an area that we call impunity, a system where a certain group of people are allowed to live beneath the law, meaning that you can do what you want to them and no one has to answer for it. And when you have a situation like that, you will get more of it. In 2020, 46 officers were murdered in the line of duty. This is deeply tragic. And for all the officers who joined the police department to help and protect and really actually protect and serve, this is a tragic number. And you can imagine that if we could improve police-community relations, we could save not just the lives of civilians, but also police officers. This goes back to what I was saying a moment ago when I said there's about 1,000 police people killed by the police every year. Some of them may not I want to just say that not everybody killed by the police is killed outside of the law, right? It is lawful for the police to use deadly force in certain situations. Some of those probably are well within that area, not all of them. So we have a serious problem, but that 1,000 may not be an accurate number. More than half of US killings by police go unreported. 2021 study on fatal police violence shows more than half of killings by police were left unreported in the last 40 years. So we say 1,000, is it 2,000? Maybe it is. And I would just want to say that there's one thing that we've lost. One thing that has been jeopardized. We talked about police payouts. We talked about the cost of social unrest. We talked about loss of life. But what about the incalculable thing? Loss of trust. Loss of trust. And let me just tell you how loss of trust works, because many of you know, but I'll just specify it for you. Say you have a community where there's been chronic problems between police and community. Say, for example, you just see the scenario that played out in George Floyd, where you had 9 or 10 civilians who did not know George Floyd watch what happened to him. What effect did that have on those people? Did that event encourage people to call the police when they had a real problem? Or did that event discourage? 9-year-old Judea Reynolds, who was wearing a Love t-shirt, she, God willing, will be a 19-year-old, 29-year-old, 39-year-old woman one day. What will she teach her children about the police? What is she gonna say? Now, maybe 20 years from now, somebody's gonna say, oh, she's just one of those black radicals who hates the police. And she'll say, no, I don't hate anyone. I'm trying to save life, not end it. But let me tell you what I saw when I was 9. Think about that. Very important to keep in mind the loss of trust. Now, if a community doesn't trust police, what does that community do when crime committed by private individuals occurs in their neighborhood? Do they call? Do they report? Do they cooperate? Of course, the answer is sometimes, sure. But as much as is needed? Probably not. People say, oh, well, those Black community doesn't really care. They allow lawlessness. No, if you knock on a door 1,000 times and it never opens, are you gonna knock on it 1,001? Maybe you'll, after a while, you figure that door ain't gonna open. Not for me. So what prevails after the community has lost confidence in police? How many times do you call 911 and don't get an answer before you stop calling 911? And what do the private citizens who have been failed and they feel abandoned, what do the private criminals, the private citizens who commit crime, what did they know about the likelihood of them being caught and held responsible in neighborhoods where there's no trust between police and community? Do you follow where I'm going here? We have to stop police misconduct to restore confidence in communities where crime prevails so that there can be more safety. How many times have I or you been in a conversation where you're talking about police misconduct and somebody says, oh, wait a minute, I'm more worried about the crime we commit against each other? My answer to that is, of course you are. But when there is a bad relationship between police and community, community doesn't have anywhere to call. We're over-policed and we're under-protected simultaneously. We've got to fix this problem because private individuals who commit crimes know they can do so in certain neighborhoods. They know they can sell dope. They know they can traffic in women. They know they can jack people. They know they can get away with a certain amount of mayhem in your neighborhood, which means it's unsafe for you and your children. And then you wake up and you say, I can't even send my kid to the park no more because them bunch of, crackheads are doing what they do. And the other ones are, fighting over drug turf. I can't live here. And so I want more police. Oh yeah, but if they do come, I remember what they did to my nephew the other time. So you see, they put us in this weird catch-22. Trust may be the worst thing that we've lost, and we have to restore. So look at it together. Damage to city and trust, social disintegration, exploiting divisions. Now, look, the United States is not alone in the world. We only represent about 4% of the world's population. And let me tell you, I was in Congress for 12 years, and I can assure you there are countries out there who don't like the United States. Now, some people may say, well, it's because of colonialism, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, there's countries that don't like the United States. Can we just agree that that's a fact? I know it's true, but if you've never traveled outside the US, you may not know really that there are issues, right? Vladimir Putin, during last year's protests, you think he didn't know that there's deep racial division around policing in the United States? They literally set up internet trolls in Ukraine and in other places to send messages over here to work and agitate the division between America to weaken the country so that they can be the world's most dominant power. It happened. It's demonstrable. It's provable. They did it with the election. They did it in this. They literally helped Trump become president. And they helped this city, they helped agitate conflict. But if we don't have the conflict, if we solve the conflict, we're a lot more safe and we have a better situation. And so I'm saying that there are foreign policy and national security dangers associated with not handling this problem. So it brings me to this point of inaction. Some folks, you may recall that I started my presentation hitting on this point of inaction. Do y'all remember that? Let me tell you a little bit about that. This is a picture of a man named Kenneth Clark, a brilliant scholar of sociology. And if it weren't for him, Thurgood Marshall would not have been able to build the factual basis to overturn American apartheid, also known as segregation, Jim Crow. He, in 1954, came up with the Thao study, where he proved systematically that American racism and segregation was hurting the psyche and the confidence and the imagination and the ability to learn of Black kids by showing that Black children were shown white dolls and black dolls, and you had little Black girls being asked questions like, which doll is smarter? Well, a doll is plastic. It ain't smart at all, no matter what color you paint it. But you ask that little Black doll, which doll is smarter? She picks out the white doll over and over and over again. Which doll is nicer? Which doll is prettier? Which doll are you? And then she picks the Black doll, proving that American apartheid was damaging Black people. And obviously that's true. So water is wet, just in case you didn't know, sky's blue, right? I mean, it's the most obvious thing, but we needed to prove it in court. That was Kenneth Clark. Fast forward to 1967, he testifies in front of the Kerner Commission, another report written after a dramatic, tragic incident of African-American person dying in the hands of police. Then there's civil unrest, then there's a committee, then there's a report. And here's what he said in his testimony. I read that report of the 1919 riot in Chicago, and it was as if I were reading the report of the investigating committee on the Harlem riot of 1935, the report on the investigating committee of the Harlem riot of 1943, the report of the McCone Commission on the Watts riot, I must again in candor to you say, as members of this commission, it's a kind of Alice in Wonderland with the same moving picture reshown over and over again, the same analysis, the same recommendation, and the same, you guessed it, inaction. But guess what, folks? What is the 21st Century Policing Commission? Oh, that was after Ferguson, right? So we haven't stopped this cycle of inaction where there's a tragic incident, there's a protest, there's civil unrest, there's a committee, and then there's a report, and then we do it again. Wash, rinse, repeat. But we've got to break the cycle of inaction. We've got to do something different. We've got to come up with a new way. I can tell you that I've been part of this report merry-go-round too. Right after I got elected as Attorney General, me and John Harrington teamed up. He's the head of Public Safety the Public Safety Department for the state of Minnesota. This is the first time we had a Black Commissioner of Public Safety and a Black Attorney General. Based on our life experiences, we said, let's not wait for a crisis. Let's do something now. We convened a group of both police and citizens. We had Black Lives Matter participants. We had ACLU folks. We had the broad range of folks' experience. We had a lot of tough meetings, but we call it Reducing Deadly Force Encounters. And then we came up with a report, which you can link to, 28 recommendations, 33 action steps, many of which have been passed into law in Minnesota. And since then, very limited action at the city level, some action, not that much at the state level, and the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act absolutely abandoned. I'm worried about inaction. I'm worried about repeating cycles. I'm worried about not doing anything. And, I respect everybody who was no on the ballot question in Minneapolis. I was yes, because of what I've just shared with you now. But whether you're no or yes, we still got to do something for all the reasons we've been talking about. There are cities that have made some important moves. Newark, New Jersey, led by Ras Baraka as the mayor, was sued for its chronic problems of police brutality. And they made some changes. In 2020, 0 shots fired, 0 payouts from 2020. In 2021, they had some problems, small by comparison, but they made real changes. Real changes can be made. Ithaca, New York, making changes. Camden, New Jersey, got rid of their municipal police department, had a county police department, and they have made dramatic strides. Now people, and you're dealing with people on the political left, they always gonna say, yes, 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 but there's problems. I'm like, of course there's problems as human beings, right? But if you can make progress here, meaningful progress, that means somebody's son or daughter is gonna come home alive. That means somebody's parent's gonna come home alive. And therefore I don't need 100% perfection in order to make some improvements. I just need to keep some folks breathing. And that's what I hope that we're working on. No one is above the law, no one's beneath it. And shouldn't be, not in a just society. We've got to have criminal prosecution of criminal police. We've got to have firing of bad police. I don't mean to imply all police are criminals, certainly they're not. I know that to not be true. But when they are criminal, they must be criminally prosecuted or they will operate with impunity. And when they're bad but not criminal, they should be fired. You do those two things, you're going to improve some things. I mean, and look, these people are a stain on policing. Imagine yourself a police officer who joined the force to do the right thing. And then you got somebody like this Officer Holtzclaw in in Oklahoma City. This man chronically raped Black women and was only caught because his supervisors said, well, why are you stopping at these places and checked out during these times? And these women, many of whom who had been exploited in prostitution, many of whom were suffering from drug abuse, had been sexually assaulted by this guy chronically. He knew that nobody cared about them. He knew he could do it to them whatever he wanted. But imagine being an officer who's a good officer having to work next to that creep. Imagine that. And imagine having to work next to Derek Chauvin, who had north of 15 excessive force complaints, including one in 2017 when he brutalized a 14-year-old kid. And he's being prosecuted in federal court for it right now. Derek Chauvin, if he were fired after his 4th or 5th or 6th or 7th complaint, he might be selling insurance and he might be hanging drywall. He might even be a security guard at the Walmart, but he would not be facing 22 years in prison. It's a good idea to fire bad officers when they start showing patterns of abuse, for their sake and for the community. Because if you let them keep doing it, they're gonna ring the bell one day, and Derek Chauvin sure did. I think it's important to take a look at these pictures. Derek Chauvin, does he look sad? Does he look like I have to do something I don't wanna do? Or does he look like, who the hell do you think you are telling me what to do? Look at the expression on his face. He's looking at the protesters saying, get off. He's looking at the protesters saying, check his pulse. He's looking at the protesters saying, he can't breathe. And his look back is, boy, you better shut up and mind your own business. Some people think he had his hand in his pocket. He didn't. He actually had on a black glove. No sense in scraping up your knuckles when you're using excessive force on a suspect. But he did pull out his mace and grab it and ready to spray people when people were thinking about approaching him to making him stop. Now look to the other one, black and white picture. You see the men, 2 men hanging there, but don't forget to look at the man here down here on the bottom. Don't forget to look at the expressions on the face of these folks. Look at this guy. Can y'all see my screen? Can y'all see my arrow? If yes, say, yeah, look at this guy. Does he look disturbed to see what he's seeing? Does he look upset? Does he look like, wow, a human being is being murdered and brutalized right in front of my face? These people are somebody's parents, grandparents, living in Duluth right now. Let me tell you about a pretty good guy. Michael Erskine is a good guy. I've gotten to know Michael. He's the chief of police in Duluth. I like the guy. He's a good guy. You know who he is? He is the grandnephew of Irene Erskine. Who's she? She's the woman who falsely accused these men of rape and resulted in their murder. My point is not that you should blame Michael for what his aunt did. It's not his fault. But it is to show how close these things are. You think if you're looking at some person 80, 90 years old, when you go to Duluth, you're not looking at one of these people or one of their children or grandchildren? You think they never had a conversation? You think they've never passed down some of the things that happened? I will tell you this, a lot of Duluthians say, I grew up in Duluth, I never knew about it. Well, at least they had enough sense to be ashamed. But I'm telling you, one of the problems with making change here is that, you know, this is something that it's not just the police, it is an institutional cultural norm we're trying to overcome. It's the institutional cultural norm we're trying to overcome, deeply rooted in American history and culture and society. This is what we're trying to overcome. We are trying to go from a Jim Crow society to a multiracial democracy in which everybody's rights are respected, and it's not an easy transition to make. And as you know, from January 6th, some people don't want to make that transition. You know, so lessons from the Chauvin trial. You've got to prosecute criminal behavior aggressively. George Floyd was typical, and he was not. It was not typical that the whole world, because of the courageous and quick thinking of Darnella Frazier that the whole world would get to see a murder literally unfold over 9.5 minutes. But it's not unusual to see people killed on video or beaten or misused. Think about Rodney King. But we don't usually get to see the whole bloody tale when the man goes from yelling and help me, I can't breathe, to his voice being labored and his claims going slower and slower until he's not yelling at all. And then he's dead. Normally we don't see that, but we saw that. And it should let us know that the activists who are decrying this, they're not making up stuff. This kind of stuff happens every day, just not on tape all the time, not at a great angle all the time. But this time, the world can't turn its eyes away. You know, one of the good things about that was atypical is that private sector lawyers stepped up and helped me prosecute this case. Normally that doesn't happen. You know, if you watch some of the cases being played out now, some of the prosecution isn't very good. And I think you ought to treat this case as if you care about the victim. All these cases. There's a lot of reasons why the George Floyd case is typical and a lot of reasons why it's not. These are the real heroes. These are the heroes. This is who the credit goes to. I do thank the activists and I do thank the lawyers who got involved, but the real people who made the real difference are these folks right here. Not one of these people knew George Floyd. None of them knew him. What they knew is that a human being was crying out in agonized pleas for help, and they helped simply because they recognized his humanity. And as we talk about this is happening to the Black community, we are right, but it's not only happening to the Black community, but actually not only the Black community is the one calling for justice. Look, there's several white people here, and it's not just young Black people. Look at the older folks who are here. And it's not just the Black teenagers and 20-year-olds. Look at the 9-year-old. It was a multicultural, multi-generational effort to recognize the decency and humanity of all people. And in this case, George Floyd. I heard some nasty folks talking about how George Floyd, he had drugs and he'd been in trouble with the law. That is exactly why we must stand up for George Floyd. If you gotta be the valedictorian of your class to have people care about you, that's a sad state of affairs. It is because George Floyd did not climb a crystal stair and that he had faced unemployment, he had faced addiction, he had faced the criminal justice system, but he also was a tremendous athlete at a certain time in his life. He had the love of his family and he had the love of a woman who he met. He was a father, he had the love of his child, Gigi. He was a man who had lived a good life, not a perfect one. And if our society cannot respond to get justice for a person like that, then we really don't have a justice society. It exposed a hidden reality, but something that's hidden is there, you just can't see it all the time. And the world responded. Look at this, Buenos Aires, Brisbane, Australia, Cardiff, Wales, Cape Town, South Africa, Dakar, Dublin. I was recently in Lisbon, Portugal. They wanted to talk about George Floyd. The world knows state-sponsored abuse of private citizens. I mentioned the China picture, the Tiananmen Square picture. Now the world has this picture, a uniformed individual abusing a private citizen. You can be in Dakar, Senegal, or you can be in Lagos, Nigeria, or you can be in Nairobi, Kenya, or you can be Medellin, Colombia. The world knows state-sponsored abuse, and the world is horrified by it. And I hope we're horrified enough to do something. Now, people applauded when Derek Chauvin was convicted. And that's good, but I'm a little afraid people think that one case is going to change a historic social phenomenon. It will not. It will not. One case isn't going to get this job done. We need it to be the norm. The criminal conduct is prosecuted no matter whether the person has a badge or not. It didn't make me feel good, and I did not celebrate to see Derek Chauvin walk into that, because I know that America has a mass incarceration problem. People losing their freedom, that's a serious thing. But if anybody ever earned it, he did. So I don't celebrate it. I don't stop others from celebrating it. But I just know that if you have impunity and a lack of accountability, you're going to have a problem. And that's what we got. So let me wrap up by saying this was the team that we pulled together to try to get justice. And we had, just like there was a multiracial, multi-generational team, that's what we had prosecuting this case. We had a young Black woman who's very pregnant right here. She's on parental leave looking after her baby. But one day that baby's gonna look up and say that his mama helped prosecute somebody who did a horrible thing. And so it was very important for Natasha to be part of the team. You know, Zuri, Latina, very sharp young lady, family from Puerto Rico. She stepped up. Also Puerto Rican, Lola Velasquez. But then we had several white members. We had Jerry Blackwell, who was sort of our star. He was brilliant. And I was glad to see the world see a Black man who was towering figure in the world of law, and the regular Johnny Cochran. And then we had Matt, Frank, and Dion, who's Native American, this young lady right here. Multicultural team. Multicultural team. And that's how we're going to get through this. We need everybody to stand up for what's right. It can't just be oppression's not confined to one group. It can't just be women standing up for women's rights. It can't just be gay people standing up for their rights. It can't just be Black people standing up for their rights. We all have to stand up for what's right, no matter who and no matter what. So police misconduct is a clear symbol that we have a two-track society when we should have a one-track society. We need to meet the needs of the community. And let me say, can we break the cycle of inaction? The answer is yes, if we act. But we're sort of not acting nearly enough right now. I don't want to say we're not doing anything, but we're a little day late and a dollar short, and our measures are sort of halting. We need to grab a hold a little tighter. And I just want to wrap up by saying that one of my heroes is this guy. His name is Charles Hamilton Houston. And he said a lawyer is either a social engineer or a parasite on society. And I just want to say that is not just confined to lawyers. It can apply to anyone. You're either doing something or you're not doing anything. And we need to get and recruit more people to join the cause of justice. We can't possibly have too many leaders on this. We need as many as we can possibly get so that we can succeed and that everybody can say that I live in a safe society that cares about my humanity. And I'll just say leaders are people who will choose an uncertain but possibly better future than a certain but terrible status quo. We know what the status quo is. Do we want something different? Do we want to try something different? I think maybe we should, but it's going to take all of us to get there. And that's all I got today. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney General Ellison. I'm Yahoo Williams, and Attorney General Ellison and I are supposed to have a conversation, and we will. Just want to share a couple of slides to frame our conversation, and we're a little short on time, so I'm going to try to do this quickly. But when Attorney General Ellison ends with that question on whether a lawyer can be a leader or a parasite on a community, I want to be clear that the lived experience that he has brought to that work has been transformative for Minnesotans. We have lived with the reality of what it means, not simply to have Black faces in high spaces, but to have people who have a lived experience which informs the way that they're tackling issues of racial justice in our community. Attorney General Ellison talked about a couple of things which are really important. When we talk about incremental change in America, It doesn't need to be radical change if it is based on those founding principles, which Attorney General Ellison articulated in his conversation with you about what should inform this as part of the democratic process, participatory democracy, which we've been excluded from. So this is a larger question. It's not just about what's happening to Black and brown bodies on the streets. It's also about dealing with this question, which at its core is about how do we save or redeem those elements of participatory democracy which remain important. In fact, as Attorney General Ellison put it, systemic oppression results in social convulsion. They result from one another. I share both of those with you quickly, because when we look at this from a larger standpoint, James Baldwin was fond of saying the world changes according to the way people see it. And if you can alter even by a millimeter the way that people look at reality, you can change it. I want to salute Attorney General Keith Ellison because he changed the way that people looked at the reality of dealing with police violence in our community. It has been an ongoing process, but one which is involved, and he is always good about acknowledging this, activists, community organizations, and people who've been willing to step up, just like the conference organizers here, to continue those difficult conversations. When we do that, when he mentions Ken and Mamie Clark's famous doll experiment, and Kenneth Clark speaking about kind of reliving this over and over again, this is one of those points in our history where the Derek Chauvin trial will be a line of demarcation that says this was a hiccup in a system which, as Isabel Wilkerson argues in Cast, has been running the way that it was designed to run. And it's not until we have these types of interventions, Ken Potter, challenging the issue with felony stops, which what John Choi is doing now. And then certainly all the work that Keith Ellison has done. I want to mention that Attorney General Ellison talked briefly about his background, but go back to 1992 when he was on the front lines protesting here in Minnesota with regard to the the beating of Rodney King, captured on videotape. In that moment, they asked the Minneapolis police chief if something like that could happen here. Ha ha. His response in that moment was, well, that's kind of almost, when did you stop beating your wife question. As long as we recruit from the human race, anything is possible. But I think when you look at the way things are here, the lines of communication, good training, people held accountable. The irony is he's saying all those things in 1992, and we know this is why freedom is a constant struggle. This is why Attorney General Ellison is clear that we need to focus on solution-based responses. In fact, that's going to be what we're going to talk about together. We can't just walk away and assume that victory in this particular case means a victory that is lasting. It is something that we have to commit to in tangible ways every day. Let me conclude by saying this. When Attorney General Ellison asks us to look at history, he quotes Melville, he quotes Kennedy. He's asking us to consider that these aren't new problems. Go back to the Niagara Movement, 1905. What are they asking for in their Declaration of Sentiments? The very first thing. We demand upright judges in courts, juries selected without discrimination on account of color, and the same measure of punishment and the same efforts at reformation for Black as for white offenders. We should not be able to have conversations like this that are 100 years old, and they be in dialogue with our contemporary moment in ways that are so damning to the notion of a participatory democracy that has grown and evolved. We are fortunate to have an Attorney General that's willing to tackle that history in a meaningful way. In fact, it says we need orphanages and farm schools for dependent children, abolition of the dehumanizing convict lease system. They could be talking about the school to prison pipeline today because it's an ancestor of that inequality. In fact, people get destabilized by language like defund the police. I'm not talking about that here, but I like this cartoon from last summer. Where were they reallocating that money? Affordable housing, job training, education, mental counseling, substance abuse treatment. We go back to that referendum a couple of weeks ago in Minneapolis. Everybody focused on the question of policing, but 1 and 3 are just important. 1 is about accountability, which our Attorney General has given us in that office, so central to questions about criminal justice in our community. And number 3 was about rent control. See, these issues are much bigger than just talking about policing. And again, I think one of the things that's so phenomenal about having Attorney General Ellison in this role is that we can at least be confident that in this office, we have a representative who understands in a very deep and meaningful way that it's not just the violence against Black and brown bodies, it's the 6 degrees of segregation. It's the social determinants of health. It's the epigenetic harm that comes from not dealing with these issues that are contributing to the problems. Attorney General Ellison, I know you get this question all the time. I have to ask you, people want to know, what can they do? And I love that you are always so solutions-based. What can people do as they're listening to you today, thinking about how they can take action? What are your recommendations for them to get involved and stay involved?
Well, for the people who live in Minnesota or close by, I would say that the one thing you cannot do is be discouraged around what happened around question 2. I would say this, look at the people you know who voted no, and don't demonize them. Get them in a room and say, okay, what can we do? And let's do that. Because normally in moments like this, people kind of run to their corners and they prepare for the next fight. But lives are dependent upon us doing something. So if Jacob Fry says, you know what, I don't mind kind of housing traditional policing under, more health responses, social workers, stuff, and getting the Office of Violence and Prevention working coordinated with traditional policing. If that's what's possible, let's do that, right? And let's not let folks not do that, right? I wrote an op-ed about this just the other day, and I'd like to try to get it to y'all, because I'm not trying to say that I got the answers, I don't, but I can tell you that this is a moment of opportunity we cannot let slide. But some folks who want to just keep everything the way they've been, they're more than happy to let it slide. Oh yeah, that's a nice idea, Keith. The other thing is, no matter what walk of life you're in, grab your piece of it. Let's say you're a business person. I was talking to some Chamber of Commerce folks the other day. I said, what's the business case for the status quo? How often are you gonna let 500 buildings burn down in a central business district? How's that going for your profitability? How's that going for your recruitment? How's that going for your retail? So, talk to people where they're at, Don't talk to people where they're not at, talk to them where they're at. And so I think that this is critical to also do, to say that the status quo is bad for business. The other thing is to understand that not all police are anti-reform. Now, they may not be where you're at, but not all police are anti-reform. 14 Minneapolis police officers signed an open letter denouncing Chauvin and declaring their willingness to work with community. Take them up on it. And I'll tell you that, it is a luxury to be able to say, I don't approve of those people, I'm not talking to them. You ain't serious about solutions then. You're fine to let the next George Floyd happen because you'd rather preserve your purity than actually get your hands in the mud and fix a problem. If you are an academic, your importance is critical at this moment. Because I've been a politician, I still am one. We don't think of most of the good ideas we push in Congress. Some smart person from some university says, you should change the tax code like this. Great. So then we put it in a bill format and we roll with it. And then we have a hearing, we call resident smart person and they say, well, here's why you should do this. And then we get these guys to vote for it. So I just want to say to the academics, does training really work based on empirical evidence? If it does, when does it work? How does it work? Because if we got a crappy system and you try to train somebody in the crappy system, don't the status quo folks just say, yeah, well, that's how they tell you how to do it in the academy, but it's all bullshit. So we got to figure out, so we know training, our intuition says training is important, but it's kind of like taking vitamins. Does the body absorb them or not? So this is an important question. If you're an artist, your importance is critical in this moment. As a politician, I get up and run my big mouth. People are like, yeah, whatever. But you go get a song or a poem or a film, that will move the heart. And guess what? Human beings make most of their decisions on emotional considerations. Mostly people are emotional. You go up in front of a jury and you start talking about statistics, if they don't go to sleep on you, they'll almost certainly ignore you. You better hit the heart, you better pluck a heartstring and tell an essential truth, not a factual truth, but an essential truth. And so, You know, that's why I love Marvin Gaye. You put Marvin Gaye on and all of us suddenly understand what people were feeling, you know, mother, mother. And you just like, you could just hear the prayer, the lamentation, the heartbreak. And you know, and you can get how people are feeling at the moment. Clergy is critical here. We need a moral imperative. We need the call for the moral leadership. It is right and it is just to move the status quo. We need that. And then the other thing I want to say is we're in an interest, this is the last thing I'll say about it. Forgive me, Yahoo, for going on so long. I'm a lawyer and a politician. You got to forgive me for talking too much. Here's my last point. We're at a weird point because if you look at it historically, whenever there's a lot of police abuse of people, then there's an eruption, a reaction. Then there is this sort of like crime thing that happens. Then there is state repression that comes in. So if you look at the 1960s, you had people protesting in the street. Then, you know, you have, you know, the sort of the waning of the Martin Luther King folks, and the rise of the Panther type action. And then you get Nixon. And you have war on crime. And you have fear. And you even go to Black folks and say, man, it's dangerous out here. And in North Minneapolis, we had a 30% increase in violent crime. So what is our political reaction? Is it the war on crime? How'd that work out? Oh, move to the 1990s, same story. A great author wrote a book called Locking Up Our Own. You know, this brother was a public defender in DC, and he said, look, you know, we can talk about Reagan all you want when it comes on the war on drugs, and we can talk about George Bush too. But what about Clinton? What about members of the Black Caucus who are not racist? I mean, of course, the Black Caucus is not racist, but there is a class dimension, though. I was in that group. I can tell you there certainly is one. And you know, so often when they call for harsh public reaction to deal with a crime problem, you're going to have Black people saying, yeah, let's do that, because they're reacting to immediate circumstances in their neighborhood. But we need people to say, okay, what is all this going to amount to? Because the Black Caucus didn't want to just increase drug sentences. They also wanted the social safety nets. The society gave them none of the social stuff, but all of the crime stuff. So we're in a moment now where we've had George Floyd happen, we had protests, we had civil unrest, then we had a crime spike, all in the middle of a pandemic in which every measure of social welfare is pointing in the bad direction. Man, we got suicides up, opioids up, alcoholism up, and crimes up. But all we want to do is lock up people. And let me tell you, next year in the midterm elections, boy, you're going to see Republicans scream crime. And you say, yeah, let's talk about crime. Like the crime y'all committed on January 6th, what about that crime? Oh, no, that's oppression. Wait a minute. Y'all like Blue Lives Matter? Why you kill a cop then? Cop killer, right? So you're going to see a lot of confusion and craziness, but it's all a matter of who has the most megaphones. And one thing about Democratic politicians, they lack spine. And so they're probably going to say, yes, I'm willing to vote for an anti-crime measure. And, you know, but we need some people who are going to stand up and say, wait a minute. We do need some responses, and they need to be mental health, chemical health, things like that. We need, those got to be part of the conversation. And no, we're not voting for nothing that doesn't have those. So be very careful. And when African Americans and white folks both say we're ready to, you know, more stuff in the police budget, prison budget, say, wait a minute, what about preventing some of this stuff? I want to just commend everybody to study this 21 Days of Peace model, because it's community-led crime reduction. We've got to take safety into our own hands, not in a vigilante way. These are unarmed people, but just these folks, these church folks sitting on corners, dissuading people who would commit mayhem in our neighborhood to our private citizens, you know, very important. So I'll stop right there. More to say, but don't let people confuse you around in crime committed by private citizens and crime committed by official sources under color of law. Don't let them confuse you, because they will try to run that okey doke and it ain't right.
So much.
So sorry about that, Professor. I'll be shorter next time.
No, you putting on a clinic. We're happy to have the wisdom and certainly happy to have the time. We have a question in the chat from Anna Hall. There's so much that you just shared that I would love to unpack, but I'm going to move to this question. We'll try to get as many of your questions as possible, so please feel free to put those in the chat. Let me also say that in addition to calling out those various groups, I hope no one lost the importance of what Attorney General Ellison is sharing with regard to this moment in history. This has been, and if you pick up Elizabeth Kai Hinton's book or the work of Donna Murch or half dozen other scholars, they're all documenting exactly what he talked about, that return to the narrative of crime and order, law and order. When we saw the Congressional Black Caucus, unfortunately, get caught up in this, they were talking about making our community safe. But as Attorney General Ellison pointed out, the hardware got privileged, not the social interventions, not dealing with poverty. And so you got $1 million blocks and $1 million in prisons. And what you didn't get were any interventions. And now, you know, again, we have to talk about Kenosha at some point, and then foolish stand your ground laws from scared people in the suburbs who are arming themselves for, you know, the coming Armageddon, rather than dealing with the social ills that could make all of us safer. And so that's really where we need to focus some of that attention as well. Anna Hall asks Attorney General Ellison, can you talk about the role of the Attorney General's office more broadly in reform work in Minnesota?
Yeah. So let me just say, you know, there are 50 states, and then there's about 7 non-states where there are attorney generals, like Washington, D.C., Virgin Islands, Guam, places like that. 43 of them are elected, including D.C. And most of them are the prosecutor of last resort. What do I mean? What I mean is that most crimes, the original jurisdiction for the crime is in the county where the crime is committed. So I cannot just roll up into St. Louis County or Hennepin County and say, I'll take that case. I can't do that. In other states you can, like Delaware and a few other, in New Jersey, but I can't do it. My jurisdiction is, I have to be invited in by the county attorney or appointed by the governor. That's how I ended up with the Potter case, which is going to trial on November 30th. And it's televised, so get your popcorn. And the other one, and so that's sort of the deal. We were invited in, Chauvin as well. So what we're doing though is, yes, we're prosecuting. We prosecute at least about 30 cases a year, the way that I just described. But we're doing other things. We started a statewide expungement program where you can get expungement for free. When I was practicing law back in the day, I charged somebody $3,000 for an expungement, because it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. But we do them for free, and all you gotta do is go online and blah, blah, blah. Now, we don't expunge every case. We don't expunge, it's not we don't expunge it. The state law does not provide for expunging like a criminal sexual conduct case. But a lot of cases, like an old dope case, we ought to be able to help you get rid of that stuff, right? Also, we've tried to accelerate the pardon board. And we've done things on the pardon board we haven't done before. Like, for example, you know, we commuted the sentence of Mayim Burrell. We commuted the sentence of several people so far. We did a posthumous pardon for Max Mason. So we're doing more things we haven't done in the past. And then the other thing is we set up a conviction integrity unit. What is that? That is my personal commitment to not allow any person who's innocent to be in a Minnesota prison. There are innocent people in prison. Sometimes it's because the prosecutor did the wrong thing. Sometimes it's because science changed. I mean, if you look at, say, accidental drowning, there are injuries that look like a punch, but because of the convulsive nature of somebody who's in the midst of a drowning incident, it's not drowning. It's not a hit assault. It's just what it looks like inside of your neck in the microscopics, you know. And then there's like shaken baby. We used to think, oh, this is a murder. Not necessarily, you know. And so there are, and then of course there's witnesses that just lied at the stand, the witness, and then they recant. And then the eyewitness testimony is like the least reliable evidence, but people think it's very reliable. Oh, I saw it. Well, if you talk to a psychologist and you talk about memory and vision, they can tell you that eyewitness testimony is not very reliable. And so that's what we're trying to do. And we're not really ready yet because we need some more grant money to ramp up, but we want to really untangle this knotty problem of sentencing, which is highly complicated. But there's one type of sentence which I think we should try to get rid of now. One is, when you're 18 or under 25, if you commit a homicide, I don't think you ought to be looking at life in prison without the possibility of parole. I really don't think anybody should get prison without the possibility of parole, because you can apply to the parole board, and if you haven't reformed, then you ain't gonna get it. But for somebody who's 18 to get life without the possibility of parole, you're saying that this person at 18 years old is so incorrigible, they will never be fit to walk amongst us. And I just cannot agree with that, not based on what we know about brain science and development. And then there's the other kind of sentence that I think needs to be looked at, and that is some of these aiding and abetting cases. Here's what I mean. A man and a woman walk into a garage where there's a man, and the man says to the other man, "Give me my effing money or I'm gonna shoot you." And then the guy says, "I don't have it," so he shoots him. Then he hands the gun to the woman and says, "Do something with this." Then when they get caught, the shooter says, "I did it, and I'll go take my 30 years, but I want a guaranteed outdate." And the woman says, "I didn't do anything. I'm scared of that dude. I just saw him shoot somebody." And they said, "Well, so I'm going to trial." So she goes to trial and loses and gets life without the possibility of parole. It make no doubt about it. Life without the possibility of parole is a death sentence. It's just slow. There are people who will never walk the streets again, didn't shoot, didn't plan, nothing. And you might say, "Well, she must have known." Okay, fine. Give her some time if you think she really was in on it, but she didn't shoot and she didn't plan. She cannot possibly be more culpable than the shooter and the planner. So we got people doing life like that. So these are some things we want to do. And in addition to a whole bunch of other stuff. As a matter of fact, yesterday we got a very good order back from a judge. We sued this really crappy landlord who was awful, really, really awful guy. His name is Stephen Meldal. And sorry, but I'll just say this. Here's what the court said about this scumbag. The court heard excessive testimony from numerous former Meldal tenants describing living conditions in their rental units that can only be described as appalling, infestation suggestive of biblical plague proportions, squirrels, mice, rats, gnats, tenants being resigned to simply keep the bathroom door closed to try to isolate squirrel infiltration. All North Side, all Black women and their kids. And if they don't like the hospitality, he would evict them. So we prosecuted him. So you know about those? Call us. We're going to do something about it.
I really appreciate you mentioning that in particular, Attorney General Ellison, because people tend to think about your office only when it comes to, criminal justice, criminal prosecutions, and murder and things like that. And they miss out on, going back to your point about what convulsions produce, organizations like the Way in Minneapolis in the 1960s, the Black Panthers, were stepping in because the state has abdicated its responsibility to be that protection for the people. When you have an attorney general's office that says, no, we're going to take this on. We're going to make sure there's safe housing in our community for all people, regardless of race, regardless of religion. That's important. And so that creates what you were talking about earlier, rebuilding that trust, which is so necessary in a participatory democracy. I want to ask you, just making sure we don't have any other questions here, about restorative justice. I think about the Supreme Court's ruling in Trott versus Dulles, capital punishment back in the 50s, where they argued that punishment should mark the progress of a maturing society. That the idea that we don't draw and quarter people anymore because we've evolved as a society is a sign that in that process of evolution, we have been more enlightened. I love that you mentioned the pushback from life without the possibility of parole for young people, because that, as you argued, is a death sentence. But I would like to get your thoughts on restorative justice. What role can conversations about restorative justice play in elevating communities and helping us think differently, helping us to reimagine criminal justice?
Well, I believe it's an essential feature of a just system. Because, look, I'm a prosecutor. I spent 16 years as a defense attorney, but I'm a prosecutor now. It is my job to be concerned about victims. And let me tell you, being a victim of a crime is something you may never forget. If anybody has ever had a 9mm dropped in their face and say, give me your money or your life, you ain't never gonna forget that. If you're a rape victim, it's traumatizing, deeply damaging to your psyche and your soul. And some of y'all have had your house broken into, and even though they didn't hurt you, how'd you feel, right? It's like, somebody's been out all my stuff. It freaks you out. And then you look and stuff and your money's gone, your jewelry's gone. We gotta be concerned about that. Now, the thing is, what we do pretty much now is say, well, if we catch him, then, we'll throw him in jail. And like from a victim standpoint, you might say, I don't need them thrown in jail. I need to tell them what they did to me. I need to tell them how they made me feel very vulnerable. I want to hear them explain why they did what they did. Even though I know there's no real explanation, I want them to apologize to me. I want them to get some treatment to get off that dope that made them feel that it was okay to rob my house. This kind of thing, we don't close the circle, right? We don't close the circle, and we assume everybody wants vengeance. And not everybody wants vengeance. And if people knew that there was another way, maybe some of them who think they want vengeance now wouldn't really want it. But we've got to create an environment where there's restoration, where there is healing. And I don't think we have that. And the other thing that I think that it does for us is that it allows us to not have to sort of like be so binary. We want criminal justice or we want to just let them go. No, we don't want either one. We want them to face the people who they harmed. We want them to hear us. We want them to restore what they've done. We want restitution. And those things might be what you need. And so I think that it is a better system. And it doesn't mean people won't be incarcerated. Some of them will be. And I know from a progressive standpoint, people think nobody should ever be incarcerated. Having been in and around the criminal justice system, I know some who actually benefited from it, right? But I will tell you that that our system is out of balance now. It has too few options. And it assumes that just depriving somebody of their freedom is the only way to solve, and it's really not. So I know that you guys have Danielle Sered as one of your speakers. I think that's a very good move on your part, very smart. I would recommend her book, Until We Reckon. I think it's a genius book. Very good book, very good book. Because last thing I'll say about it is, sometimes we get into this thing of, oh, well, you're for the defendant, I'm for the victim. No, we're for justice. We want to see the victim reformed, and we want to see the victim made whole somehow, if we can, right? We want both. And I tell you this, here's one way to not have restorative justice: 1,700 untested rape kits. That's an abomination. There shouldn't be a single untested rape kit. And if we went through a thing where a Me Too movement, and we were saying, believe women, if you won't even test her rape kit, you're pretty much calling her a liar by not testing the rape kit. Oh yeah, whatever, lady. Were you drinking that night? What were you wearing? Bottom line is that we've got to abandon that really ugly old way of approaching the system.
Attorney General Ellison, we have about 10 minutes left, and you have been on fire today, so thank you. You mentioned Danielle Sered, and you also mentioned BLM earlier, and we know the importance of female activists in particular in this space. So we live in a society in which women are often silenced, and particularly women of color. It was great to have that lead in from the beautiful poet who did the piece on Black Barbie. But you've also been an advocate for, and you worked this into your presentation, the importance of the representation of women, particularly Black women, in roles associated with the criminal justice system. Why is that so important? How do we facilitate that as a community? Because we recognize, as Charles Payne argued, men lead, but women organize. And if you're not organizing, you got nothing to lead. But more importantly, these sisters have incredible insight to offer to this system, incredible things that they're able to bring to the table. How do we become facilitators to help uplift that and create opportunities for them as well?
Yeah, the thing is that women are not exempt from the harshness of the criminal justice system at all. In fact, sadly, they're equal players in the harm. So often women are victims in the criminal justice system. And so often, and increasingly, they're defendants in the criminal justice system. And when they're defendants, very often they are burdened more than men are, because while 90% of the people in American prisons are men, how many people who are in prison also have a child protection case that's going on right alongside it? So when the man goes to prison, he probably wasn't the primary caregiver anyway. I guess it is possible that he was, but usually not. But a woman is almost always the primary caregiver. You throw her in prison, and now you're not just depriving her of her liberty, you're depriving her child of a parent. Now, some people might say, well, if she's doing stuff to get in prison, she's probably a bad mom. Absolutely not true. Some of the things she's doing may be to take care of her kids. And so, you see, and I've just seen women, one of the people who you might want to engage one day is a sister named Serena Nunn. Serena Nunn is a leader in the criminal justice area. Serena Nunn was in Minneapolis, and she was a young woman and had a male partner, mixed up in the drug system. She ended up getting charged, spent 13 years in prison, was able to get free because she did not get a fair trial, went on to University of Michigan law school, practicing law right now in Atlanta. Now, nobody would blame her if she just said, look, man, I'm just trying to make some money, because everybody needs to make a living. But she's not doing that. She's working on systems all over the country. And she's calling me up. What's going on with your pardon system? Can't you do this? Can't you do that? She's bringing the noise my way, and all over the country, not just me. So there's a lot of women in the criminal justice system who are leading in the criminal justice system because they've been through it themselves, and their families have been through it, and their kids have been through it. One of the most compelling stories I've ever heard is when I was in Congress, there was a woman who was saying, look, I'm raising this boy by myself because his daddy, my husband, is in prison. And it costs like $13 an hour just to get a phone call. And so she was advocating for prisons' phone calls to be a fair, reasonable price, so that she could, she had her stats, man. She like, look, we know that recidivism is associated with no contacts on the outside. We know that bad behavior in prison is associated with no contacts on the outside. So, quite honestly, women have to be full partners in the fight for a better criminal justice system, because they're full partners in the damage caused by the existing system. And I'm gonna tell you, Kimberly Crenshaw, superstar in the criminal justice space, she'll say, look, if you can name a man killed by the police, she can name 2 women. You say George Floyd, she say Breonna Taylor. She'll keep going, boy. She knows it. And she shamed me one time because I couldn't remember the women who were killed by the police, but there are lots of them. And yet somehow when we think that policing in America is a problem between the police and Black men. It's only because we don't know the names of the Black women. So she says, say her name, right? And so this is very important. And I thank you for the question because, in every aspect of this, women are full partners, and yet they don't get to be the face of the movement all the time. They don't get to be the speaker. They don't get to lead. So I think we've got to very, very consciously say, let's let the sister carry the message, because after all, it was her or her family member who suffered through this.
We have about 5 minutes left. When you mentioned that about female victims in particular, I remember everybody got so upset when Congressman Waters came to town on the eve of the Chauvin verdict and made the comments that she made, and people forgot. 1970s, late 70s, she is in California when Eula May Love is killed by the LAPD over a $46, $26 energy bill. So it's the epigenetic karma, the memory of that moment, which is influencing her to say, if this doesn't go right with everything that's been done here with regard to what Attorney General Ellison and others have done to make sure that we get justice in this case, then we need to stay in the streets. But when people don't, back to your original point, when people don't know that history, the jagged edges that you mentioned from Melville, then they can't make those connections. This is an unfair question, Attorney General Ellison, but I have to ask you, I think everybody on this call is going to want to know what you're thinking right now with regard to 2 trials that are taking place currently. Would love your insights on Kenosha, would love your insights on the Ahmaud Arbery case as well.
Well, here's all I'll say about the Kenosha case. You leave your home with a gun. You drive across state lines with your mama, and then you end up shooting someone. If you were there to render first aid, you would have brought a medical kit. So you came there to shoot someone. A lot of my progressive friends are horrified when they find out that I'm a hunter. Yep, it's in my family tradition, and all of y'all who eat meat, you should be a hunter too, because otherwise you just have somebody else doing your killing for you. But I do. And let me just tell you, I've never gone hunting without a gun because I'm going to shoot something. And last weekend I didn't get no deer at all. But you don't ever go, you go hunting, you bring a gun. Right? So what in the world was he doing there but to do what he did? And he clearly wanted to do, which is why he came for that purpose. So I think that he needs to be convicted. And if he doesn't, it's a stain on our system again. Now, on the Arbery case, nothing but a lynching. What's on trial is whether or not your skin color will entitle you to murder an innocent human being. And then in this case, they want to say, oh, well, he fought us, so we had to shoot him. He tried to take the gun. How can you, I'm not even speaking legally, I'm speaking morally. How can you bring violence to somebody, and when they try to resist your violence on them, they're at fault and you're innocent? No. They hunted him, they tracked him, and they killed him. That's murder, and they need to go to prison for a very, very long time. And so, look, and they keep on there's all this mess about, was he, they say he was looking at a construction site. You know what, honestly, I feel that it's completely irrelevant. He might want to buy the house, just as looking at it. So what? If a white person is looking at a construction site, they're thinking, oh, does it have 3 bedrooms or 4? Because I'm thinking about having a big family. A black person looks at it like, oh, what is he trying to steal? I don't know, a 2x4? What are you talking about? The man's jogging. So they need to go. They need to be locked up. Back to Rittenhouse, it is somewhat tragic because he is very young. Somebody taught him to be a hater. That's sad. That's sad. if he gets convicted, honestly, I hope that his youth is factored in, but I think he ought to prove that he is deprogrammed from the craziness that brought him there. But honestly, I would be somewhat surprised if he is not acquitted. I'm talking about Kyle Rittenhouse. I hope he's convicted on something. When it comes to the three who murdered Ahmaud Arbery, very clear Batson problems there. Talk about a systemic failure of racism. All it was, deeply implicated with the prosecutor and everybody else. Oh, and by the way, the defense attorney doesn't want a black pastor there. Did y'all hear that? Got too many black pastors. Black pastors not carrying no guns. Black pastors not carrying no brass knuckles. Black pastors not talking about who we gonna beat up. Why are you afraid of people who are carrying nothing other than the moral imperative? They're scared to death by the ones who carry the moral imperative. You fear that? Well, I guess Satan fears God, right?
Attorney General Ellison, thank you. You know, it's funny you end on that point because you reminded me of Justice Holmes and Justice Brandeis, but more appropriately, you know, if you think the truth is impotent, then you don't fear the word, but the reality is that the reaction to Jesse Jackson in the courtroom or any pastor in the courtroom is clear, that you fear the truth telling, the knowledge that comes with being in a position to deprogram. I want to thank you today, brother, for bringing the fire and allowing us to spend some time with you. And again, I think I speak for everyone when I say thank you for all your work. We are grateful indeed. And I will turn the program back over.
And Professor, I'm at your service. And so thanks to everybody.